Hello, and welcome to the Pay It Forward podcast, sponsored and co-done with Payabl. And for this particular episode, I'm thrilled to be joined by Lukas Yla, who is the director of the Carsharing business unit for Bolt. Now, if you haven't heard of Bolt, or if someone hasn't heard of Bolt at this point, I would think, okay, you don't always need a car, and you probably never order food. Anyway, Lukas, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for joining the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
Not a problem. It's really, really perfect because we want to talk about payments, startups, what's happening, and Bolt is just a perfect example. So, to start us off, would you mind kicking it off with an introduction on yourself and on Bolt for those who haven't heard of it yet?
Sure. My name is Lukas. I'm director of car sharing at Bolt. So before joining Bolt, I spent 7 years in car sharing industry building small local Eastern European pioneers trying to enter the space. And 3 years ago joined Bolt with an ambition to build the largest car sharing operations all over the Europe. And Bolt, as you said, is the leading European tech company. We're a super app where you can find 5 different services provided by one single app. So Bolt started 10 years ago as a ride-hailing company. 5 years ago, we introduced our micromobility service, and in those 5 years, we've become the largest micromobility operator in Europe. And then, besides that, we also have 3 other business lines. That would be food delivery, grocery delivery, and the latest member of the family is our car sharing service.
Fantastic. And tell me, how many users do you have at the moment?
Well, Bolt currently provides the services to 150 million customers in 500 cities and 45 countries. So a massive amount of people using our services every single day.
Not too shabby.
We want to make cities designed for people, not for private cars.
Very good. Speaking of vision, you were actually talking on stage just today on the Money in Tech stage with regards to how to turn 4,000 euros into 7 billion. Very catchy. Do you mind giving a little synopsis on what you meant by that?
Was not a financial advice, first of all.
Disclaimer.
Disclaimer. But I wanted to reveal the operating principles of Bolt. I think what actually differentiates Bolt is our operating principles, and the one that actually crowns all of them is our strict focus on ROI, so return on investment. And when we speak about ROI, it's about return on our invested time, our invested financial resources, and our human resources that we invest into developing the new services, new products, or even deciding where to move a button visible in the app.
Very good. Thank you for giving us that. My next question is, how integral do you think the rise of embedded finance and open banking data is to enabling payments for you?
Well, I think that's an important and integral part of the business because eventually when we provide a service, we want to receive the money paid for those services. And without integrated payment solutions, we wouldn't be able to do that. And given the scale, the massive actually scale of Bolt that we operate in Europe and in Africa in 500 cities and 45 countries, we have to provide multiple different payment services for our customers to be able to pay for the service.
Very good. And we keep talking about the growth and the size of Bolt, which is, like you said, a super app, very impressive. What tools and technologies were instrumental to, kickstarting that growth trajectory?
Well, I think I had the same idea in my presentation. We try to put some new keywords, introduce some new buzzwords, and maybe to find a way how to create a shortcut or create a new growth hack or find the silver bullet. But eventually, the fundamentals for every business is the same. And what actually differentiates Bolt is not the tools that we are using. I mean, a good example would be, and very simplified, you have Microsoft Excel and then you have Google Spreadsheets. Eventually, those tools are very similar, but the tools themselves, they're not making a dent or differentiating the companies. what actually differentiates is the operating principles, and the ROI is like where you actually put the focus. So challenging every decision that you made inside the company, where we want to expand, what new business line we want to operate, what new feature in the app we want to introduce. It's all of that has to lead to the positive ROI, and collecting that data that eventually throughout the years and having the track record enables you to make smarter and smarter decisions. So that's, I think, the key differentiator, how the principles, the operating principles that the company has, not the actual tools that they're using. Because tools, literally these days, everyone has an equal access to all the same tools.
And would you say partnerships with third parties have made a difference in making payments work, not for you, but for your users?
Definitely. What we have observed that even in Europe, in different countries, customers have different payment preferences. So in order to unlock those customer audiences and enable that your service would be available to as many customers as we want it to be, then that requires us to really look at it seriously and say, look, in this country, we see that 20% of our customers actually demand this specific payment method to be introduced. And by introducing it, we're just unlocking 20% of the new customer audience.
How do you ensure the safety and well-being of your drivers? And what are you doing to safeguard the gig economy for those that make your service what it is?
Well, first of all, when we speak about our service, we are committed to provide the safest possible service for our riders and then for our drivers, because when we are operating the marketplace, these two audiences are actually our core audiences, and we have to make sure that safety is ensured for both our customers and our drivers. And what we actually do is, well, besides our commitment, we also invest into the new service introductions or introducing the new features, such as background checks for our drivers. Then we also have rider scoring, we have driver scoring. We just recently introduced a new feature that allows our safety team to connect with the driver if we see that there was a detour of the actual ride that was suggested by Bolt. If the ride took more time to complete than actually was also forecasted by our algorithms, or if the driver car is still standing parked in the same location for unusually long time. So different features that we are introducing is aimed to ensure that our drivers, they have safe platform to earn money, and our customers also can use our safe service, and that helps to differentiate us from other services provided in the market.
Very good. And is there anything else that sets you apart from other major competitors in the space?
I would say our financial discipline. Again, now we see that we are, well, even at this conference, at this festival in Cyprus, we hear a lot of venture capitalists and startups speaking about that. Look, the investors, they are starting to reduce their investments. They have higher standards for the startups. They want to see profitability. They want to be sure that the companies that they will invest, they will actually grow and succeed in the market in the upcoming years. And these, I don't remember who actually said it, but maybe it was Warren Buffett who said that during the times of the low tide, you actually see who was swimming naked. And I think this is what we actually see in the market. It's easy to grow when money is unlimited and you can raise as much as you want, and you have FOMO in the market, and somebody sees the company receiving 100 million investments, and then VCs investing into same service provider, just a competitor, to make sure that they are not missing out on the opportunity. And now finally we see a trend where investors actually value hard metrics and the companies that are displaying the stable track record and achieving their targets. So Bolt, as I also spoke in my presentation, we never had the luxury of receiving too many investments. Bolt started 10 years ago in Tallinn, Estonia. The first investment, bigger investment, was after a year of operations, and that was 1.2 million euros. And for our region, 10 years ago, that seemed like a massive amount. And if we compare how much capital Uber has received during their 5 years of operations, and by the end of 2014, that was $1.2 billion. So that's not 2 times more, that's not 5 times more, that's actually 1,000 times more. And that was the company that we had to compete with in the European markets. And that actually forces you to have this financial discipline. And that's why we introduced ROI as our guiding principle from the early days, because we had to make those decisions where we're investing our capital to be able to compete with the bigger players that are expanding in the market. And what I would like our listeners to understand, this size of capital received is actually a key differentiator in the startup world. What it actually means is that the company that receives more investments, they have better access to the talent. They can expand times faster and conquer the market. And they can make hundreds of times, or in this case, thousands of times more mistakes when they're expanding. And for us, every single mistake that we have done, that had much bigger impact than, for example, for other ride-hailing operators.
Very good. Thank you for that insight. One of the things that is hard to miss these days is the fact that Bolt has made your ambition to become a super app in Europe well known. Do you think Europe is ready for super apps? And also, if so, how do you plan to achieve it?
Well, I think we have already made the first steps. So it's not just an ambition, that's actually the service that we are already providing. So started as a ride-hailing company, then ventured into micromobility space, and then just recently launched the car sharing service. So when you download the Bolt app in selected markets where we have our 3 mobility services, you have access through one single app to 3 of them. So you can select the best option for your trip, depending on what's the length of the trip, what's the travel time, and where you're actually going. So what's your destination and what's your starting point. And what we see that there is a synergy between all of these 3 mobility services. So if before launching the car sharing service, we heard the comments that, why are you doing this? Most likely car sharing will cannibalize the ride hailing service. But what we see in reality is that, and the feedback that we receive from our customers, we receive massive amount of comments in our first pilot city, Tallinn, the customer saying, look, now I can finally get rid of my private car. Why? Because I have free public transport in Tallinn, I have micromobility, I have ride hailing, and then eventually all my use cases that I needed to have my private car, they are covered by the car sharing service.
That makes sense. One thing that we've noticed is that some European countries have put restrictions on ride-hailing apps and, of course, other forms of rented transportation. How do you intend to balance super growth with, of course, staying in line with regulations?
Well, first of all, we already operate in 500 cities, so that's already a massive scale in Europe and Africa. We're really glad to see that we see a much bigger potential for the future and to scale the number of cities and countries where we operate. Speaking about the regulations, I would say that first of all, it is important and critical to discuss with the regulators and comply with all the regulations. So that, I think, was one of the key Bolt's differentiators, that we decided from early days of our operations that we will be following the rules. And if the rules are not there yet, or our expansion is limited, we will work together with the regulators to actually show how beneficial the services that we are providing are for the citizens, and what changes they can make by sharing the data that we have collected in multiple other cities and countries. And when we speak about the micromobility, I think that's a completely different case. That's a completely new industry that was invented only 5 years ago. And during the early days, again, we saw a boom in the market. We saw 20, I would think of 20 plus different electric scooter sharing companies just flooding the market, receiving the investments, and launching their services. And the regulation was behind it. So if we look at the private car market, we have the regulations, we have the rules where you can park the car in the city centers, outside the cities, the parking is paid. There are clear rules how you drive the car, and we don't have the confusion about that. Everybody understands those rules and they follow. With micromobility, it was that the market was able to grow much faster than the regulators to come up with the certain instructions how this service should be used. And we actually support the instructions because that eventually will enable just to scale up the market. When we have the clear instructions how micromobility fits in the city mobility, that it is actually beneficial, and we have clear rules, then consumers benefit, operators will benefit, and the cities and city governments will also benefit because everyone will see those clear rules. So we truly support that.
Very good. And for the right reasons and with a beautiful outcome, like you said, everyone benefits.
I think here is a good example that when cars started hitting the road 100 years ago, we also didn't have the parking spots designed in the cities. And somehow, if we would look from the same perspective, we could also say, wow, regulating the parking for the cars, that will stop the market to grow, because people will be forced to park cars in specific places in the city. But that didn't happen. We've seen the private car market growing massively. I mean, in Europe alone, it's 250 million private cars.
Thank you for that. And to round off this podcast, tell me, what are Bolt's plans for the next year?
We have started many businesses over the past several years, 5 years. So the company started 10 years ago as a ride-hailing service, and then eventually during these past 5 years, we ventured into actually 3 or 4 services. So we launched micromobility, we launched food delivery, grocery delivery, and then also the car sharing service. And our initial idea and the vision is that we will be providing all those services in the markets where we're currently present. And if we would look at the current markets in which we have all 3 mobility services and plus food delivery, I think there's a big gap. So what we are focusing on for the future and for 2023 and 2024 and upcoming years is simply expanding our presence and making more people to finally make a decision to get rid of their private car. So that's our vision and our core focus.